Okay, I'm going to make it larger. Yeah, okay, I keep on forgetting to say the last few shiurim and this one as well have been sponsored anonymously by a generous donor, the safe and speedy return of the hostages. Okay, so what we're going to learn today is we're going to look at Perek Gimel and Perek Dalet. So first, let's just review it very briefly. Perek Gimel, the Rambam says that just like your body can be healthy or ill, so to your soul. And okay, naturally, the illness of the soul means illness where you do things that are improper. And he draws a few parallels between these two kinds of illness. One of them is that if you're sick, you should go to a doctor. And if your nefesh is not beseder, you should go to a wise man who knows how to heal souls. Okay, and that's Perek Gimel. Perek Daled, which we're going to focus on more, is where he tells us what the health of the soul looks like. And what he says is, as we've mentioned numerous times, is that you have to do the equi-balanced kind of actions, right? Those are the right kinds of actions a person should do. So what should a person do in life? The answer is, what's mimutza? And what kind of soul should a person have? What kind of virtues should he have? What is it to be a virtue? It's that which is the characteristic, which is mimutza. And then the Rambam gives many examples for this. And he cautions us against thinking that any extreme is good. It's not. No extreme is good. Rambam's very insistent on this, that veering from the middle is a deficiency in any direction. In the Pirush HaMishnah, he tells us that one direction may be worse than the other, but in the Hakdama, in the Shemona Perakim, he says, just stick to the middle and don't veer to any extreme. How do you get these virtues? By training yourself in them through action. And if you veer off the virtue, off the middle, the way to bring yourself back is to go a little bit extreme to the other side, and that will eventually bring you back to the middle. He gives examples of that. Talks about how it's sometimes easier to go back to the middle from one side than the other, and therefore it's worth it. And the Hasidim did this thing of keeping themselves a little bit off the center towards one extreme instead of the other, because it's easier to get back to the middle from there. Mashaykin, the other one, such as like it's easier. So again, look at an example. He doesn't want you to be a glutton who eats a lot, and he doesn't want you to be someone who eats very little, fasts a lot. But if you're someone who eats too little, you're less likely to be stuck in that kind of midah and stop eating at all. While if someone who eats too much, it's more likely to end up being a real big problem. Therefore, you're better off keeping yourself a little bit on that side of eating the right amount, which is closer to eating very little. Okay, that's an example. Then he says, some people have problems with this, which is, how could you say that it's a good thing to be in the Derech HaMutzah? We find some Hasidim who did extreme actions. They fasted, they stayed up at nights, they didn't eat meat or wine, they stayed away from women, they wore uncomfortable clothing, they lived in mountains and in deserts. So if it's true that everyone's supposed to be mediocre, I think mediocre has a negative connotation, so maybe whatever. Let's just say everyone's supposed to be average, okay? Let's call it that. If everyone is supposed to act in an average way, then how can we find people who did, pious people who acted with extreme behavior? The answer is, says the Rambam, that's because they needed to heal themselves. You know why this guy fasted 100 days? Because he found himself having too much taivas achila, so he had to train himself to go the other way. One other reason the Rambam says is because sometimes they have to move out of the country and go live in the desert, because if you live in a place where people have a bad influence on you, you have to go and abandon society. But not that inherently it's virtuous to go live in the desert, or virtuous to avoid eating, avoid women, be uncomfortable, etc. It's not virtuous inherently, only sometimes necessary as a corrective measure, and sometimes necessary because you live in a society that is influencing you and you have to get away from them. Now, he says, fools see these pious people and think that, oh, this is clearly a good thing to be so extreme. And then they started torturing themselves. And this is a terrible thing. Actually, it's wrong to do this. Hashem doesn't hate the body. And again, he goes back to the example of in the third chapter that he compares the health of the soul to the health of the body. He goes further with that analogy. He says, just like if you take medicine, someone is sick, he needs to take medicine. But if he continues taking that medicine when he's healthy, then, you know, it's not going to be good for him. So too, his extreme actions are medicine. The Torah is perfect. The Torah doesn't tell us to do any extreme actions. On the contrary, the Torah wants a person to be natural, go on the average path, eat what's permitted. And take a look at this phrase. I want you to remember this phrase. And Yashiv Hamadines B'tzedek U'B'Yosher. So the Torah wants people to be normal and to civilize societies, populate countries through justice and integrity. Not to live in the caves and mountains, etc. Torah doesn't want you to do that. You can find proofs from the Nevi'im that direct the people to average behavior. Okay. Fine. Then he goes into another thing, which I'm going to skip over here, about, remember we said before, it's a little bit to go a little bit extreme. So maybe you'll say that maybe that's why it's worth fasting a lot. So he said, no, the Torah itself covers that little bit of extremism. Okay, we're not going to go into that. But if a person tries to do more than the Torah, he's doing an evil thing. Okay. So the upshot is, from the whole chapter, that a person should seek the average actions, and a person should not go to either extreme unless you need it for a corrective measure. But you should look out for that. You should look out. Sometimes a person sees himself, and a person should, same way a person should review his health and make sure everything's fine physically. You should also review his psychic health, that's to say the health of his soul. And when he sees that he's going off of the Derech HaMamutza, he should quickly do what it takes to get himself back to the center. And then he goes into Moshe Rabbeinu, the Chet of Moshe Rabbeinu and his Kas. That's we're not going to speak about that. And then he ends up by saying that amazing, it's a remarkable statement. If a person seeks to make all his actions average, he is in the highest level of humans, and that's what brings you close to Hashem, and that is the most perfect way of serving Hashem. Amazing thing. And Sham Ar Chaysav, if you evaluate your ways, you'll see the Yeshua. You see the deliverance, okay? Okay, so I have two questions here. The first question is, why is it good to be average? Never says why. So just we have to ask, why is that so ideal? And the other question is that the Rambam insists over and over that he wants you to be average and don't be extreme. Even those Hasidim that were acting with extreme behavior were only doing so because temporarily necessary, but it's not a virtue at all to be, okay? Remember, you learn this parak, and I mean, what the Rambam is telling us basically is that all these people who talk about like, oh, that tzaddik who fasted, you know, whatever, Bahab for his whole life, like, that's not a good thing. That's what I'm saying. Unless the tzaddik had a problem with eating too much, in which case he should have done so for a couple of months maybe, or maybe a couple of weeks, and he should have gotten back to normal. That's what I'm saying over here. So he's basically denying this whole business of asceticism or precious for its own sake. And even when you see it, it's not for its own sake. Don't think that there's such a thing. The problem with that is that the Rambam himself indicates in a few places in the Moira that this is a valuable ideal. So in the Moira Devuchim Chilik Gimel Perek Nun Aleph, where the Rambam It gives a summary of the Sefer, the last four prakim. No, I shouldn't say that. He says it's a summary, sort of, but of course it's not. I should have said he says like the upshot of the Sefer, the final word. And in Parak Aleph, he describes the way of worship, the derech avoda, that's appropriate for someone who basically internalized everything that the Maimonides teaches till there. And that is that avoda is to be focused on Hashem. That's the essence of that avoda. To spend your make your mind busy only with Hashem and avoid anything but for Hashem. Okay, so that's what we call Vayhi Sham Im Hashem. And to give yourself over to Hashem in your mind. And this happens through being by yourself and being misbaided. And that's why, says the Rambam, that every great person seeks to be alone and only is with people only mitoch hechrech, only as much as necessary for his needs. So here the Rambam encourages his baidedus, which in the Shemona Perakim he says, these guys who are going and often living by themselves, oh, so it must be they were in a bad country where they had to avoid the people. Here he says very clearly that every virtuous person who wants to serve Hashem in this special way, which is basically abandoning this world and focusing solely on Hashem, that itself is extreme behavior. So even the structure, even the recommendation that the way a person should serve Hashem is by doing nothing but for thinking about Hashem itself is extreme. But explicitly, the Rambam says that therefore the behavior that person engages in is a behavior of avoiding society. In Chelikim Perak Ches, he says some people recognize that all the impulses of the physical, all physical impulses are, let me just erase that because those parentheses are just confusing. All physical impulses are a disgrace and only necessary because you have to do them. So therefore, a person should minimize eating, drinking, and beer as much as possible. As much as possible. Your tachlis adam, what makes you a human being is to conceive of truth, as we learned in Parak Aleph. What the nature of a human being is to know the truths. The highest truth is understanding Hashem and the angels and the actions of Hashem as much as possible. Those are the people that are with Hashem. So what are you supposed to do? Nothing but for thinking about Hashem. How you have to eat and drink? Okay. Bare minimum. Nothing about taking an average. Minimum to subsist, to live. Same thing he says in Chilek Gimel Perek Yud Beis. The people of great people who know the wisdom of Metzias, okay, they know that the tachlis of a person is what makes him a human being, which is intellectual hasaga. For the body, just do what's necessary. Lechem lechol, beged lilbash, no more. Whatever's necessary. And he says the problem that people get themselves into all sorts of problems by seeking things that are more than necessary. So the Rambam doesn't say, look, some people eat way too much and some people eat way too little, and you should find the average. He says subsistence is all you need, because what are you all about as a human being? You're not an eating and drinking machine. You're really about intellect. Eating and drinking is all necessary to keep you alive, so just do it as much as necessary. So the Rambam there contradicts himself. From the Shemona Perakim to Maimonides, Shemona Perakim, where he's very clearly insists that one should always be average. In Shemona Perakim, he encourages some extreme behavior. And what makes the problem even deeper is that in the Shemona Perakim, he bavarns those chassidim. Okay, maybe there's like special people, like he says in the Maimonides, maybe it's for people on a higher level. But in the Shemona Perakim, he insists that even those chassidim who you see engaged in great precious were really just doing what it says in Shemona Perakim. That implies that even that precious is not appropriate even for unique individuals. Furthermore, now we're going to ask a question which is not the Rambam al Rambam. We're going to ask him from Rabbi Avram ben Rambam al Rambam. Generally, Rabbi ben Rambam goes like the Rambam, and specifically in these instances, this is from the Sefer Hamaspik Levdei Hashem. He references the Rambam in Shemona Perakim about the Derech HaMamutza. So he very much seems to hold of the Rambam's rule of going to Derech HaMamutza. And yet, Rabbi Avram ben Rambam has an arichos about Precious. He has a whole parak about Precious, which he starts by saying that the physical world is a mechitza. And this is the principle of Precious, that look, being physical separates us from Hashem, and therefore we have to minimize being physical. Nothing to do with Derech HaMamutza. It's just we have to minimize being physical as much as possible. And this is just the beginning of that parak, this excerpt over here. But the Rambam is marich ma'od about Precious as a value in and of itself. And because the physical world is one extreme and the world of spiritual or intellectual is another extreme, and we should avoid being physical as much as possible so that we should be in the presence of Hashem. And this is a contradiction to the Rambam in Shemona Perakim, but it does sound like the Rambam in the Maimonides. Okay. So now let's talk about why. Let's get to the first question I asked. Why is Derech HaMamutza a good way to act? So what the Rambam says, the Rambam gives some clue in Hilchos Deis, where he says that the Derech HaBeinus in which we have to go is the Derech Hashem. It's called the Derech Hashem. And Avraham Avinu taught his children this path, as the pasuk says, "Ki yedativ l'mana sheitzav es banav es beis ha'achor b'shomru Derech Hashem lasis tzedakah v'mishpat." Okay, so for some reason, Derech HaMamutza is called Derech Hashem, and the teaching of Avraham Avinu, in other words, what kind of behavior did Avraham Avinu encourage in his family? It was Derech HaMamutza, and that's the Derech Hashem that pasuk refers to when it says Avraham Avinu is mitzvah b'nei beis ha'achor v'shomru Derech Hashem. Fine. Now I want to show you another source where the Rambam talks about why it's important to be balanced, and I want to see how this works out with what he says over here in Hilchos Deis. That's the Derech Hashem. In the Maimonides Chelik Beis Parak, this is going to be the key to understanding, and it's an amazing thing what's happening over here. This parak will be key to understanding. I think, at least the angle I'm taking today, to understanding what the Rambam wants with the Derech HaMamutza. This parak, the Rambam is explaining why there's a need for law in general. So he says like this. He says, man is by nature social or political creature. What that means is that it's human nature to live in a group. It's a very important idea. Unlike other animals that can live on their own, humans cannot live on their own. Okay, so we like to think of ourselves as individuals, but actually it's necessary for us to be part of a society. Okay. Furthermore, says the Rambam, the way the human being is made, you can have there's a great variability between one human being and the next. And just like people look different on the outside, so too on the inside, people are very different from each other. It's like the Gemara in Brachos, the reason for that is because of the makeup of the human, whatever. He explains why that's the case. In other words, why is it that any two lions are basically the same, but when it comes to the other species called human being, we have this great variation? Rambam talks about why that's the case. And he says explicitly, he says this kind of difference that we have between one human and the next, we don't have it in any other species. The variability, the variation within a species is very small. But by humans, you can have two people that are as if they're from two different species. In other words, and he gives an example, you have someone who's so cruel that if he gets angry at his kids, as a little child, he'll slaughter him. You have another human being who's so full of compassion that he can't kill a bug. So one is this wild animal, and one is this soft-hearted. It's as if they're different species, right? Lion kills animals and whatever, other animals don't. And like this person is lion-like, and that person is like what's it called? I don't know, whatever a soft animal is, a bunny rabbit, face. And so it's like they're two species. So now we have a problem, like the Rambam. By virtue of nature makes that human beings are so different from each other while at the same time it's necessary for human beings to live in a society. And we got a problem. How are we gonna create a society? How are we gonna make a pack, a city, a group, community, when people are so different from each other? The answer is you're gonna have a law. You're gonna have a leader. And this leader is going to establish what is okay to do and what's not okay to do. And he's going to basically average everything out. If something is getting less of a focus on, he's going to increase it. If there's something that gets too much, he's going to decrease it. And he's going to say, look, we all have to act the same way, such that the natural difference between one person and the next will be balanced. What's the right word? I mean, he says it will be hidden. It's a funny word. Through the tiyum, through making each one be mat'im, that the law creates. Okay, so the law in general, what it does is, says the Rambam, it makes out of many different kinds of people. It unifies them, and that's why he says the Torah is not natural, but has an association with nature. Okay, this is very complicated because he developed a natural theory of law, meaning law is necessary due to nature, and the Torah is also necessary due to nature, but it's not nature. It has a shaykhus to nature. And then he points out that this is part of human nature itself. Part of God's wisdom in the human race that he wanted to exist is that they also need to have within themselves this ability to legislate, to make laws. It's also a function of being human, because that's what's necessary in order to unite people that are so different from each other. Okay? This is Chelik Beis Perek Mem, an excerpt, it's not the whole parak. Now, if you think about this parak, so my question is like this. I mean, here it says, basically, the Rambam is saying, I have no problem with people being extreme, such as even killing their children out of anger. Except, how is that guy going to live together with the softie? So we need a law. How does that stem with what we learned in the Chasdeyes, that don't get derech hamutz is derech Hashem? Here he seems to imply that we really have no problem with extreme cruelty, nor with extreme compassion, except that we have a technical, practical problem. How are these two people supposed to live together? How can they be in the same community? But in the Chasdeyes, we learn that it's somehow called the derech Hashem to be average, which suggests that there's something inherently wrong with being extreme. Okay? Yeah, question there. Go ahead.
Maybe the way to not be extreme is by having a strong, moderate manheg, and that maybe a person by himself wouldn't be able to change that, and that's why the Ram needs to say in the Meira that in order to get to that level of memutza, it has to be al yidei manheg.
Right, that's true. But here's the thing. The thing is that the Rambam in the Meira says that the manheg is only necessary not because the derech hamutz is ideal inherently, but rather because we need to settle on something in between if we're going to coexist. You see? He's not just saying that the way to get to the derech hamutz is through a manheg. He's saying that the derech hamutz, which is what the manheg affects, is necessary simply as a way of compromise and of cutting off those extremes, of shaving off the extremes and finding something that works for everyone, that everyone could agree to. I won't be so mean, I won't be so cruel, you don't be so compassionate, and that way we can be neighbors. So it's mashma that it's only necessary as a practical thing. You see, you get the point? That's the problem there. Okay. Now, if you think about it, Lamaisa like this. I mean, what the Rambam says in Chelik Beis Perek Mem, he describes a person who would kill his children out of cruelty. And he says like this, you know what my problem is? I have no problem with that guy, except that, human beings live in society. Man is a political creature. Man is a social creature. So how is that guy supposed to get along with the other person? Well, now, that implies that there's nothing inherently wrong You can't say about this person who kills his kids out of anger, you can't say in and of itself, whoa, this is a problem. We have to reform this individual. Rambam does not say, you know why there needs to be law? Because some people are naturally cruel. He doesn't say that. He says some people are naturally cruel, but their neighbors are naturally kind, and they can't not live as neighbors because human beings have to live together. That's why we need law, implying that the natural cruelty of the person who might kill his children in and of itself is not objectionable. And it's an amazing thing. So what that means is, the understanding of that is, the Rambam says that the variation between human beings makes them like different species, right? So if there's a species of human beings, let's call it like a species within the human race, for whom this is natural, nobody could object to it. At least in the Rambam's view, okay? You could think about this. This is a deep idea. But the Rambam implies that in as much as there's, let's say, a subset of human beings, or a subspecies of human beings, that kills their children out of anger, one cannot object to that on the face of it and say, that's wrong. Why not? Because that's their nature. That's normal for them. The same way we don't object to the fact that lions kill zebras. There are lots of things we don't object to in nature. So why do we object? Why would we object to the fact that some human beings have this nature of killing their kids? So let's say you have some tribes living somewhere, I don't know, North Sentinel Islands, whatever that last place where there's like these chevra that are living by themselves, untouched by civilization, whatever. If they kill each other and they kill their kids when their kids, speak without addressing with respectfully, I don't know, whatever. Like, fine, that's what they do. Say, oh no, these people have to be reformed because they're uncivilized. No, that's their thing. That's their nature. We have no problem with that. That's what the implication of the Rambam is. Now, I must say though that there is a little bit of contradiction here, because the Rambam in the Shemona Perakim insists that human beings don't have an inherent nature and all habits are learned. So the Rambam here in the Moira seems to say that it's natural that some human beings are one way, some human beings are another way. So that's in itself a contradiction. But to the point of saying that we have no objection to the fact that a person is cruel, except that how is he supposed to get along with his neighbor? That makes sense if it's in his nature. If the nature of humans is such that they're cruel, at least some humans, then we have no problem with nature. No one has an objection to nature. It's a very important idea in the Rambam. We take nature. Nature teaches us what's right. We don't teach nature what's right. But then there's a conflict, because nature also makes human beings with their nature, plus their nature to live together. Okay, so nature also gives them this thing called law. But if it's true, if you could say that the midas are natural, then you say, look, I have no objection to the person that kills his kids, except for I have to figure out how to get along with him. Right? It's like, you call the cops, my neighbor killed his kids. Like, okay, what's the problem? Problem is, it doesn't work for me. I don't, because my kids, I like to send to school. Like that's what I'm saying, Batson. So, but that's true. That makes sense. If it's natural, you can't have a taina against nature. Taina doesn't work out to me. We have to figure out a way if we can live in the same neighborhood or not. But that's good if it's natural. The Rambam in the Shemona Perakim says not natural. I just want to parenthetically comment on that. It's a machloikis. On the face of it, it's machloikis Aristotle and Plato, whether midas are natural or midas are learned. The Rambam says both. The Rambam here in the Murray implies it's the natural, and in the Shemona Perakim he says they're learned. There's this Al Farabi wrote one of his books is about how to shtim Aristotle and Plato, and he says this is Nishkan Stira. If you remember, Al Farabi is the one that the Rambam said everything he says is soilus nakia. The Rambam wrote in his letter to Shmuel ibn Tibon, everything Al Farabi says is soilus nakia, fine flour. Al Farabi has a shtickle Torah that it's not a stira. I don't understand it, but it probably has something to do with the fact that this stira is there in the Rambam as well. Okay, but the Rambam is saying in the Moreh Nevuchim that be'etzem, there are some human beings, the nature of the human race is such that when you talk about, okay, act humanely, let's say, right? So Rambam says, well, what does humanely mean? And the Rambam was a very big believer in that. Yes, act humanely. What does it mean, act humanely? Everyone should live up to what it is to be a human being. But what is it to be a human being? For some human beings, it means killing their kids. For some human beings, it means not killing bugs. So fine, that's okay. Now we have a problem. The problem is that how do we create a society? Now, if you remember, if you remember, I think it was the first or second shiur, I told you that Al-Farabi, in his aphorism of a statement, which is the source for a lot of the Shemona Perakim, he says that ethics is you see, remember the name of his book, Al-Farabi Shemona Perakim. It's not Shemona, but the book that Rambam takes from is called Aphorisms, which means memories of a statesman. And he says meforish that the study of ethics is the study of statesmanship, meaning how to be a king, politics, meaning how to make laws. What are the right laws for a society? What are the right teachings for a society? Derech HaMotzah. Because if you want to create a society, then you need Derech HaMotzah. The Rambam, as we discussed then, the Rambam for some reason avoids politics in the Shemona Perakim. He doesn't say that he doesn't say that midas are there for political purposes, but that's what the implication is right here in the Moreh Nevuchim. So he doesn't say it explicitly in the Shemona Perakim, but I want to argue that based on what he says in the Moreh Nevuchim, that's essentially what he means in the Shemona Perakim also. Meaning, there's no value in the Derech HaMotzah in and of itself. Meaning, I shouldn't even say that. There's no value in Derech HaMotzah for the individual himself, except to the extent that he's considering the society. So Derech HaMotzah is necessary, as Rambam says in the Moreh Nevuchim, because the only way that we can ever figure out a way to get along as human beings is if we meet in the middle. Okay? And that's why it's so important to be Derech HaMotzah. And I'm going to explain this a little more. It might sound weird, like, okay, so I'm acting average because I want to get along with other people. We'll see. I think we'll get a little bit of a deeper understanding of this. Oh, by the way, Al-Farabi also says, yeah, it's a question. Go ahead.
How are we coming back to the Rambam in Hilchos Deis, which sounds like it's something Hashem wants from us, ba'etzem?
Yes. Okay, so we're going to get to that in a moment. Right. The Rambam in Hilchos Deis says that Hashem. Yes, we're going to get right back to that in a minute. Al-Farabi also says, by the way, that he also draws this analogy between physical health and psychic health. And he says, just like the body, the body is physically healthy when everything's in balance, because they used to think that the body had these four humors, and four humors is like, you ever heard of the expression mara shchera and mara this, mara that? Is the four maras, four liquids, whatever, and they have to be in balance. And health is all about balance. And the guy comes to you and he has a fever or whatever, that's because something's out of whack, out of balance, and that's why you have to sometimes maybe take out some blood or do this or do that to get things back into balance. And Al-Farabi says, oh, so just like physical health is balance, health of the city is also in this Derech HaMotzah, which is balanced. Just as the health of the body is an equilibrium of its temperament, so too are the health of the city and its uprightness an equilibrium of the moral habits of its inhabitants. So if you want a city to be healthy, you have to find equilibrium. And equilibrium means, look, you're going to have one guy who's like this, one guy who's like that. We don't like extreme behavior. Why don't we like extreme behavior? Because extreme behavior is destabilizing. And extreme behavior is destabilizing because you're extreme one way and he's extreme another way. Okay. I'm mentioning that also because it's interesting to me that the Rambam Parag Gimel, where he draws the parallel between physical health and psychic health, for some reason he doesn't mention this point as well. That just like being physically healthy is equilibrium, so too the nefesh. I don't know why he doesn't do that. It's so obvious. So let's get back to Derech Hashem. So Mashiach. So it says, so the Rambam in Hilchos Deis says, okay, this is the Derech Hashem. Well, now we know that Derech Hashem means the way that you can create a good society. That's the essence of the Derech Hashem. That is what it means to be the Derech Hashem. Derech Hashem means what way will work for a lasting, perfect, and just society. So I'm going to explain to you a little bit more what that means, and then we'll see there is something deeper to that, more, let's call it spiritual. But before we get to that, let's take this Marmaka. The Rambam in the Moreh says that Avraham Avinu and the other Avos had constant hashgacha, even when they were engaged in physical, material concerns, because the purpose of their status was to bring to existence a nation that will know Hashem. As the pasuk says, so what was Avraham Avinu's agenda? What was his purpose? Which Rambam says is great worship of Hashem. What was Avraham Avinu's worship of Hashem? Pure worship of Hashem. It was, he set himself a mission that he's going to create a nation. So he wants to not just personally discover Hashem. He wants to develop a nation, society that is focused on knowledge of Hashem. And then he brings that pasuk of a derech Hashem. So what that suggests is that the derech Hashem is necessary, with derech Hashem, which is the derech habeininus, is necessary for the most perfect society. It's not about an individual in and of itself. It's about a people. Now, what does that have to do with Hashem? There is one element over here which I'm not going to go into because it's very important, but not for today, which is that in order for humans to be masig Hashem echad, they have to be unified. Okay, I'm not going to say more about that, but I do want to acknowledge that this business of humans being unified is not merely the best way for society to function, which is very important in and of itself. It also enables them, once human beings are unified, then they can be masig Hashem echad. Okay, so there is something very spiritual about this. Okay, in other words, like this. The Rambam in the Meira says, I have no problem with the fact that human beings are all different from each other, except that they live together, right? Sounds like it's completely a practical affair. There is also something deeper, which is that if human beings would allow themselves to be different from each other, then they wouldn't be able to be masig Hashem echad. So they really have to unify. In a deep way, human beings have to unify. It's not just a matter of a practical concern. But for today, we're focusing on the practical concern. If you want to have a nation that's functional in the best way, then you need derech hamotza. Okay, so what I'm trying to nudge us towards, be'etzim, is like this, is that, and this is something that's very foreign to us, really, that we have to think about society. We're very not used to this, and I think the reason why we're not used to this is because for a long time we were in Gullus, so like we just don't think about society, we think about ourselves, because we gave up on trying to create a good society, basically trying to survive and keep Yiddishkeit, preserve it. So we don't really develop this kind of idea of like, let's think about how do you create a good state. But it's very fundamental. In other words, every individual could do things that are not only going to enable his own flourishing and success, but actually he can be part of a successful society. So you have to think politically. You have to think about, well, what kind of behaviors are best, not for me alone, but what are best for the community. There's a mashal in the Meira, just say this briefly, Gimel Parak non Aleph, in that same parak, has an elaborate mashal about the king in his palace and various degrees of how close people are to the king. Some people are outside the city, so it all depends on how much you know, whether you know Chachmas Elokus, whether you know halacha, whether you know nothing, whether you know the wrong thing. So each of those categories are either traveling the wrong way away from the city, or they're in the city but not quite in the palace, or they're in the palace but they haven't met the king. So all sorts of levels. But there are people there that have the wrong opinions, and those are harmful to the city, and those you have to kill. That's what I think you mentioned this one. The shiur, the killing a mummer, is because they're harmful to the city. But what I want to bring out from that is that what we're trying to achieve with Das Hashem is not something that's only personal. More importantly, we're trying to achieve a good city, trying to achieve a good society. It's a big deal. It's a very big deal. So now I want to take this back to Precious, okay? Here's I want to show you two things in Rambam, and then I want to tell you my solution for the contradictions of Rambam. So far what we established is that the derech hamutz is necessary as a way of avoiding extreme behavior so that there can be cooperation through compromise between different people. Okay, so derech hamutz is an amazing thing. It's like if the lions and the rabbits would start living together, then we would find a derech hamutz. We would say, okay, the lions should not kill rabbits so much, and the rabbits should get a little tougher. And try it'll work out. That's how it's gonna. That's called derech hamotza. That's the whole thing. That's the whole thing. Now, not to minimize it. Forget it. It's very, very important. If we can actually figure out a way for human beings to have peace, it's great. This is the Rambam's plan. I happen to think maybe it's more complicated than this, but whatever. This is the Rambam's plan. We'll see. It's like mamish. It's the plan for redemption. Remember, we saw the end of the pack. He talks about Yeshua. This is what I think what's going on. We'll get to that soon. I want to show you two quotes from the Rambam, which will bring us now to the second problem I asked, which is that the Rambam does advocate in the Moreh Nevuchim, like his son Avraham, he advocates for extreme precious because Olam Hazeh is a bad thing. Bad thing. You don't want to be body. So Avraham says like this. This is another quote from Avraham and Rambam. Two more quotes from Rambam and Hamaspek. He says the Torah is not for Hasidim Yireh Hashem alone. It's for everyone. It's for the whole nation. And the whole nation, not even 50%, 25%, or 10% can do precious. He says, I'm talking to you about precious here, about this idea that you should avoid physicality. So that's a Avraham soll wissen, not even 10% of the people could do this. And in fact, not only can't they, but he says it's actually important that they don't. If all the nation would do precious, you know what that would mean? People wouldn't farm, people wouldn't work. So this is not, we don't want everyone to do precious. So not everyone is cut out for precious, and it would be a terrible thing if everyone would do precious. And the Torah is specifically made for the Klal Ha'umah. That's why he goes into, that's why he's answering, why does the Torah talk about reward in this world? If precious is an ideal, so why does the Torah say, oh, if you do serve Hashem, it's going to rain? We don't care about that. We're parish. The answer is the Torah is talking to the common man because the Torah is made for the masses. The Torah is made for the masses and precious is made for the individuals. Precious is not for everyone, and we don't want everyone to do precious because we need a nation. To need a nation, we need people that like to make money, like to do everything, because that's what makes the world go round. Now he talks about avoiding getting married, which he says, okay, so that's part of precious. People don't get married. He says, what if everyone would do this? So no more nation. So again, here's an example of precious, which Avraham says that Eliyahu and Elisha never got married due to precious. They didn't get married. Of course, Moshe Rabbeinu is Pirish, but Eliyahu and Elisha says never got married. Someplace else he says that. So he considers that to be a legitimate form of precious, because remember, that's not the derech hamotza. Mafurish, not the derech hamotza, right? In the Shemona Perakim. But it's precious. The guy he doesn't want to have to do with this world. But again, he says not everyone should do this because then no more nation. V'li nira, this is an amazing thing. That's why the Nevi'im got married. It's a big kasha. If it's precious to not get married, so why were some Nevi'im got married? Even Moshe Rabbeinu was originally married. The answer is because, and this is the key, because you can't have people emulating their precious. If the Navi is going to be a Parash and not going to get married, so the other guy's going to say, oh, you see that you want to be close to Hashem, don't get married. So the other guy who's not a Navi, or not close to that, is also going to be a Parash. And everyone's going to talk about these big tzaddikim who didn't get married, and all these smart guys and get these ideas in their head that they should also be big tzaddikim and shouldn't get married. And next thing you know, is what's it called? We don't have babies. Not a good thing. So you remember the Rambam said, what is the Torah? I called your attention to this expression before. The Rambam says, you know what the Torah wants from a person? See if we can find this. Wants you to be miyashiv hamadinais b'tzedek u'b'yosher. Remember that? Torah wants us to flourish as a nation, as a country, as a political body, as a society, community. There's a political consideration here. In other words, you can't do something that's going to be harmful for the masses. Now, Avraham says a major thing. He says, some people didn't get married, they on Elisha. Okay, but why didn't all the Nevi'im practice celibacy? Because they made a cheshbon. Listen, what are you going to do? Bad, somebody wouldn't get married. But then, everyone's going to copy me. So I want to explain to you what that means. Let's analyze Avraham and then we'll plug back into Rambam. You see, it's amazing. Avraham is saying that the Torah is designed to work for the Ummah. That is so important. The fact that the Torah is so designed that the masses could live by it is so important that there could be an individual who will resist his personal aliyah of precious because he has to be supportive of the masses. Since it's appropriate for the masses to get married and have children, for that reason, even lofty individuals for whom it would be appropriate to not get married, they got married because they stand as a model that people emulate. So they can't do something. So here you have basically the big tzaddik is in a bind. A big tzaddik cannot do something that is going to be destabilizing for the masses. The big tzaddik who, let's say, is parish ben ha'isha, better keep it a secret. Because otherwise everyone else will be parish ben ha'isha. This is what Rav is saying. And the Torah is be'ikr. If you look at the Torah itself, says Avraham, it doesn't think about the Hasidim. It's for everyone. And that's why the Torah talks about, as I mentioned before, that's why the Torah talks about physical reward, because the Torah is talking to the common man. Torah is talking to people that do care about being rich. Therefore, it says you'll get rich if you serve Hashem. So bringing this back to the Rambam, here's what I think the key is. There's the Torah law, and the law is made to, as Rambam says, to engender uniformity in society. Uniformity is achieved by averageness, not by extremism. Extremism is destabilizing. Are there people for whom extreme precious is necessary and appropriate? Yes, as Rambam says in the Nevuchim. Yes. But you know what those people have to do? They have to hide it. That guy who fasts every single day, he doesn't want everyone to do that. Same when he got married, because he can't have everyone not getting married. So Elamai, he fasts every day. He's probably hiding it. Now, remember we said the Rambam asked the question, how come some Hasidim fast so much and do this and that? And his answer was, they're healing themselves. And I said, what do you mean? At least maybe the unique individuals have this special precious. The answer is yes, the unique individuals do have this special precious, but no one's supposed to know about it. Because anytime they let the people know about it, the wise tzaddik is supposed to only do things that people can emulate. The tzaddik is not supposed to go fast 100 days, and then when the other guy wants to do the same thing, he'll say, "Oh, it's not for me. It's not for you. It's for me." People don't like that. That's fact is, people see someone doing something lofty and spiritual, they want to do the same thing. Exactly what Avraham says. If Yeshaya Hanavi would not get married, then the other Joe Shmo wouldn't get married, and that's a bad idea. So Yeshaya Hanavi said, "Don't get married." So, Bekitzer, the Rambam cannot say, you know why the Hasidim fasted? Because Hasidim are allowed to fast. That's not true. Hasidim are only allowed to fast if no one knows about it. So yes, there's this kind of secret precious, but it's a secret precious. It's not the precious that, if we're talking straight Torah, in other words, the core message of the Torah, which is for the masses, the core message of the Torah is Shemona Perakim, straight up Shemona Perakim. Everyone should be derech hamutza. This way, we're going to have a just society that's going to function. It's going to be amazing, and everyone's going to get along. And let me just be very clear. But I mean to say something very clear, very pashut. If someone's going to say, I'm parish from this world, I don't think that anything, I think everything physical is a detriment for my spiritual pursuits, and I'm going to avoid everything physical. I'm not going to have a wife. I'm not going to care about food. You know what's going to happen? He's not going to get along with his neighbors. Pasha not going to get along with his neighbors. Because he's not going to mow his lawn. I don't know, whatever. Lots of reasons you can think of. So Mela what? Mela, it's all very nice to have this kind of precious, but it's not the recipe. It's not the prescription for society. And it's not a prescription for someone who wants to live in society. You know, the Rambam says in Hilchos Deis, he references this here as well. That's one of the reasons why these Chassidim moved out of town is because they moved into the desert because they had to get away from people, because society is evil. But the way I'm saying it now, there's really two things. You always read that as like, okay, you know what? You know what? It's justified to go into the desert if you have to, because society is evil. But actually, the way I'm saying it now, there's actually another element here as well, which is that you know why the big tzaddikim don't live in the desert? Because even though they would live in the desert because they just want to leave Olam Hazeh, but they're actually sacrificing their spiritual precious for the sake of society. If the society is evil and they can't help them, then they might as well just go live in the desert. So it's not just running away from society. It's that if we, like I said before, I said we don't really think about society anymore because we gave up on it, because of whatever, because of Gullus, let's say. So fine. So then you might as well just be a parish. But in as much as you can put into effect some sort of common good through encouraging and focusing on mitzuah, on averageness, then you really should do that. It's the biggest kindness you could do to people. And I want you to think about, you should think about, I'm saying it shouldn't be, if it's a major chiddush, then you misunderstand. I mean, it's a major chiddush to me, but if it sounds like, if you're skeptical about it, then you have work to do, because it's really very, very, very obvious and very simple. That a tzaddik is doing everyone a big favor when he acts normal, basically. And that's just what I'm saying, is that the Rambam is saying normalcy is very, very good. It's a very healthy thing for society. It's a very healthy thing for the balabas place to know that, that gadol he also likes to have he also enjoys a piece of cake once. They love that. Like, yeah, okay. So get so much. The tzaddik pretends and he likes it. That's what a tzaddik is. He goes to the kiddush and he has a piece of cake because he doesn't want them to think that when they enjoy the piece of cake, they're ice barfs. No, they shouldn't think that, because it's not going to work for them. So he has to go ahead and And then if he ever fasts and people catch him, it must be he was okay with them catching him. Why was he okay with them catching him? Because he was doing it for refuah, like the Rambam. What about a guy who fasted and Taka had precious? How do you know about him? You don't know about him. If you read Shemona Perakim, you don't know about that guy. You only know about that guy if you read Maimonides. So maybe that guy he's not the one that Rambam's talking about. Zen nearly is the amazing solution to this whole conundrum. And now I want to just wrap this up with telling you whether remember the Rambam gets into this whole, at the end of the Parak Dalet, he talks about it's the highest level of serving Hashem. And if you do this, you'll get the Yeshua, right? So it sounds like this. I want to say like this. We're looking for Yeshua. Pasha looking for Yeshua. We're looking for the redemption. The redemption. Ram says the Meira, there are two things you have to start to understand this. He says in Chelik Aleph Perek Lamed that tzedek is the true redemption. And in Chelik Beis Perek Lamed Tes, he says that tzedek means balance. The Rambam says that tzadikim means balance, and the Torah is called Chukim Shvotim Tzadikim because it's balance. So what's the true redemption? Is balance. Why? What does that mean? It means exactly what we're talking about Chelik Beis Perek Mem. It means, what's the redemption? Redemption is everyone should get along. It's a very big deal that we can't get along with each other. You want to know how do you get the Yeshua? So everyone's like, Tipis of Yeshua, right? So Tipis of Yeshua, what are you doing about it? How are you going to get the Yeshua? You're going to encourage Decha Motzeh. And that way you're going to bring about world peace, Pasha, because that's the key to human beings getting along with each other, is tzedek. So therefore the Yeshua is totally in tzedek. So in other words, my point is, we have to realize, it's a very interesting way to think about it. We're not just looking for when we talk about what's the ideal behavior. So we tend to think, okay, we're thinking about myself, right? Because we're very selfish. But what I'm saying now is actually when we talk about the ideal behavior, we're talking about what is ideal to bring to the world. It's a Yeshua. It's a redemption. We can bring to the world this new way of being, a new paradigm of tzedek, which is izum, which is balance, and that's going to solve the problem of one person thinks one way, one person thinks another way. What if we encourage this? And again, to just repeat my point before, the chassid who wants to be purged from this world has to withhold himself from doing that, at least in a way that people are going to discover him, as a way of supporting this Yeshua and this tzedek. And I found also from Alpha Rabbi, he says a very interesting thing. He says really the same point. He says if a person just thinks about what's equilibrium for himself, but he's not heedful that what he's thinking about shouldn't be without harm for the rest of the city, pays no attention to what might be harmful to other people, so he's corrupt in the political art. He's not fully being political. Mamish this point, that when we talk about the derech of how to be noyeg, a major part of that, and the way I'm arguing today is that the major part of that, for at least for the derech ha-hamutza, is to consider society. And that's the Yeshua. Okay, so I think we solved the problems. I think it's an amazing way to think about things. Well, it makes you realize how many levels are going on. And I just want to stress one point again, that I don't know if I stress this enough, that the point is that the Torah, the main message of the Torah is for the Hamayim. So therefore, when the Rambam is putting forth straight up Torah, as opposed to the Moreh Nevuchim, where he's like, okay, if you're up to the end of the Moreh Nevuchim, you're a very lofty person, and here's how you have to serve Hashem. But the main point of the Torah, the thing that Torah is pushing, Be'ikr, is for the masses. So the Rambam is representing that faithfully. And you have to be very careful. You can't just stira one Rambam to the other. Rambam is doing Torah over here. He's not doing something else, not doing that kind of elitist behavior. I just want to bring out just interesting to think about that. You have to realize that sometimes it seems like things are steerers, but like, no, here he's doing one thing, there he's doing another thing. Okay, any questions while we're on record? Anything that needs to be clarified on record? Or otherwise? Okay, so we will stop the recording. Take from this. Stop the share, stop the recording.
Shkayach.
Yes, we're still on recording because I don't know how to do this. Oh, here it is, right.